The crystal tumbler was heavy in his hand. Cold. Like the silence in his study. Marco Bellini sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of mahogany, a relic of a forgotten Italian palace. The room was his sanctuary, a fortress of leather-bound books he never read and shadows that knew his secrets. Outside, the sprawling grounds of his estate were a dark, manicured sea under the faint light of a crescent moon. Here, inside, he was king. A king of ghosts and whispers. They called him the ghost on the street. A name earned over 30 years of ruthless efficiency. A name that meant problems disappeared, rivals vanished, and order was maintained with a quiet, terrifying finality. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. The ice clinked softly, the only sound in the cavernous room besides the steady tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. It was a sound of control. Of order. A soft knock came at the door. Marco did not look up from the ledger on his desk. Its columns of numbers told a story of his empire, clean and precise. No one disturbed him at this hour. Ever. The knock came again, more hesitant this time. He let the silence stretch, a weapon he wielded as skillfully as any other. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that was felt more than heard. Enter. The heavy door swung inward with a faint groan. Mrs. Gable, his head of staff for 2 decades, stood framed in the doorway. Her face, usually a mask of stern professionalism, was tight with uncertainty. She clutched a thin folder to her chest like a shield. Mr. Bellini, she began, her voice strained. Forgive the intrusion. Marco finally lifted his gaze. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, held no warmth. You know the rules, Eleanor. I do, sir. It's just, there is a matter of some urgency. Regarding the open staff position. A maid. They needed a new maid. A triviality. Something she should have handled hours ago, days ago. He narrowed his eyes. This was a breach of protocol so severe it bordered on insubordination. Something was wrong. And this could not wait until morning, he asked, his tone dropping a degree colder. Mrs. Gable swallowed, a small, bird-like motion in her throat. The applicant, sir. She is insistent. And she is here now. I felt you should. I felt you should see her yourself. That was new. In 20 years, Eleanor Gable had never once suggested he involve himself in the hiring of domestic staff. He was a ghost, even in his own home. He existed in the background, a powerful, unseen force. He did not conduct interviews for maids. A flicker of irritation crossed his mind. He was about to dismiss her, to remind her of her place, when he saw the genuine conflict in her eyes. It was not just uncertainty. It was pity. Curiosity, a long-dormant emotion, stirred within him. Very well, he said, the words clipped. Bring her in. Mrs. Gable nodded, relieved, and stepped back into the hall. A moment later, a woman was gently ushered into the room. And the world stopped. The crystal tumbler slipped from Marco's fingers. It hit the polished floorboards not with a crash, but with a sharp, definitive crack that echoed the breaking of something deep inside his chest. The amber liquid and shards of glass sprayed across the dark wood. 2 of his men, standing like statues in the darkened corners of the room, instantly moved, their hands going to the weapons concealed beneath their jackets. Marco raised a single, trembling hand. Stop! The word was a choked whisper, utterly alien to them. They froze, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. The woman stood just inside the doorway, her head bowed. She was thin, too thin. Her dark hair was cut in a simple, practical style that did nothing to flatter the sharp, elegant lines of her cheekbones. She wore a threadbare coat and clutched a worn handbag with both hands. She looked like a stray, battered by a storm and seeking any port. She did not look up. She seemed afraid to look up. Her name is Anna, Mrs. Gable said softly, as if speaking at a funeral. She has no references to speak of. No family. She is in need of a fresh start. The woman finally lifted her head. And Marco Bellini forgot how to breathe. It was her face. The face that had haunted his dreams for 5 years. The face he saw in every crowd, every reflection. Older, yes. Lines of hardship and sorrow were etched around her eyes where laughter used to be. But it was her. The eyes were the same shade of warm, liquid brown. But the light was gone. When she looked at him, there was nothing. No recognition. No anger. No love. Just the polite, vacant fear of a stranger in the presence of a powerful man. Isabella. His Isabella. She flinched at the sound of the shattered glass, her gaze darting to the floor and then back to Mrs. Gable, avoiding his eyes entirely. "I am very sorry for the late hour," she said, her voice a soft, melodic thing he remembered whispering his name in the dark. Now it was brittle, fragile. "Mrs. Gable said you were a busy man. I can come back." Marco couldn't speak. His throat was a knot of barbed wire. This was impossible. A hallucination brought on by whiskey and grief. He had searched for her for years after the accident. For years. His men, the best in the world, had found nothing. A cold trail. A ghost of a ghost. Mrs. Gable looked from the woman to Marco, her face a canvas of dawning horror and understanding as she saw the color drain from her employer's face. She had worked for him long enough to know the story. The wife he never spoke of. The one great love and the one great failure. He finally found his voice, a rasp of its former self. "You're hired." The woman, Anna, looked stunned. "But you haven't asked me any questions." "I don't have." "You're hired," Marco repeated, this time with more force. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady. He felt 100 years old. "Eleanor. Find her a room. Give her whatever she needs. See to it." It was a command. An order that would not be questioned. Mrs. Gable nodded quickly. "Yes, Mr. Bellini." "Of course." She gently took the woman's arm. "Come along, dear. Let's get you settled." As she was led away, the woman glanced back at him, just for a second. Her brow was furrowed in confusion. In her eyes, he was not the husband she had once loved, the man she had built a life with. He was just a strange, powerful man who had dropped a glass and given her a job without an interview. A puzzle. A threat. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence that descended was heavier, more profound than before. It was the silence of a tomb that had just been opened. Marco's world had been shattered and remade in the space of a heartbeat. The ghost of his past had not only walked back into his life, she was now sleeping under his roof, and she did not even know it. "You will want to stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change everything for both of them." His men thought he was losing his mind, but this was something more, something deeper, a reckoning he never thought he would have to face. "Now, let's get into it." Leo, his loyal lieutenant, stepped out of the shadows. He was a man who had seen Marco order executions with less emotion than he had just shown. He looked at the broken glass on the floor, then at his boss's pale, stricken face. "Boss?" Leo asked, his voice low and cautious. "Are you all right?" Marco didn't answer. He walked over to the towering window that overlooked the gardens. He stared out into the darkness, but he wasn't seeing the manicured lawns or the distant city lights. He was seeing a sun-drenched cafe in Sicily, a stolen kiss in the rain, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. He was seeing a ghost. It was her, Leo, he whispered, his own voice sounding foreign to him. "Isabella." Leo went very still. He had been with Marco for 15 years. He was one of the few who knew the whole story. He had been the one to deliver the news of the car accident 5 years ago. He had been the one to lead the fruitless search. "Boss, that's not possible," Leo said, his voice gentle but firm. "We looked everywhere." After the accident, the report said she had severe amnesia. She could have wandered anywhere, become anyone. She became Anna, Marco said, turning from the window. His eyes were no longer stormy, they were burning with a cold, hard fire. And she became my maid. Here. In my house. The sheer, cosmic cruelty of it was breathtaking. The one person he had tried to shield from his world, the woman he had pushed away to keep safe, had stumbled right back into the heart of it, utterly defenseless. He had divorced her against his own heart's command. He had told her he didn't love her anymore, a lie that had tasted like ash in his mouth. It was the only way to make her leave, to get her far away from the escalating war with the Moretti family. He had sent her away with enough money to live 10 lifetimes, telling her to never look back. He had planned to eliminate his enemies and then, one day, go to her, on his knees if he had to, and explain everything. But he never got the chance. The news had come 3 months after she left. A brutal car accident on a winding mountain road. The police report was clinical. A single survivor, a Jane Doe, suffering from catastrophic head trauma and complete retrograde amnesia. By the time Marco's men got there, she was gone from the hospital, discharged into the care of a state program. She had vanished. He had torn the underworld apart looking for her. He had called in every favor, broken every rule, spent millions. Nothing. It was as if she had ceased to exist. He eventually accepted that she was gone, a casualty of a life she never chose. The guilt had hollowed him out, turning him from a ruthless man into a cold, unfeeling machine. It had solidified his reputation as the ghost. A man with nothing left to lose. Until now. Now, she was back. And she remembered nothing. "What are you going to do?" Leo asked, his practical mind already calculating the risks. If the Moettis ever found out she was alive. They won't, Marco cut him off, his voice like flint. Because no one is going to know. Not a soul. You, me, and Mrs. Gable. That's it. To everyone else, she is Anna, a new maid. Do you understand? And for you, boss? What is she to you? Marco looked at his right-hand man, the closest thing he had to a friend. For the first time in years, the mask of the ghost slipped, and Leo saw the raw, aching vulnerability of the man beneath. "She's a second chance," Marco said quietly. "A second chance I don't deserve." The next few days were a special kind of torture for Marco. He, a man who commanded a city's shadows, found himself a prisoner in his own home. He began to live his life through the silent, black and white feed of his security cameras. He watched her. He watched her as she learned the routines of the house. He saw her polishing silver in the grand dining room, her movements careful and precise. He saw her folding linens in the laundry, her face set in a mask of concentration. She was a diligent worker, quiet and unobtrusive. She kept her head down and her words few. He learned her new self in fragments. She startled at loud noises. A door slamming, a car backfiring in the distance, it would make her jump, her hand flying to her chest, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't name. He saw her in the kitchens late at night, unable to sleep, staring into a cup of tea as if it held the answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. One night, he watched on the monitor as she wandered into the east garden. It was his private garden, the one he had designed for her years ago. It was filled with her favorite flowers, white roses, jasmine, and night-blooming cereus. No one was allowed in there. He watched as she stopped before a trellis heavy with climbing roses. She reached out a tentative hand and touched a single, perfect white bloom. She didn't pluck it. She just stroked the velvety petals, her expression softening into something he hadn't seen yet. Not happiness, not quite. But a deep, resonant peace. A memory, he thought, his heart aching. A ghost of a memory, clinging to a scent, a shape. He called Mrs. Gable to his study. "Tell me about her," he commanded, his back to her as he stared at the wall of monitors. "Anna, sir. Everything you know." Mrs. Gable cleared her throat. "There is not much to tell. She came to the city a few years ago," she said. She has worked odd jobs, cleaning, waitressing. Nothing steady. She lives in a small apartment in the West Quarter. The rent is 2 months past due. Marco's jaw tightened. The West Quarter was a pit. A place for the desperate and the forgotten. Is Isabella living in a place like that? She has no identification beyond a state-issued card, Mrs. Gable continued. No family she can name. She told me she was in an accident a long time ago. She said it felt like her life began that day. Everything before is a blank page. A blank page. Carmine Moretti had not just tried to kill her, he had stolen her life, her past, her very identity. He had torn out every page of her story and left her with nothing. The rage that filled Marco was a cold, pure thing. It was different from the hot anger of business disputes or betrayals. This was personal. This was a desecration. Her apartment, Marco said, his voice dangerously low. The back rent. Pay it. For the next 5 years. Use a shell corporation. No trail back to me. So. And her salary here. Triple it. Mr. Bellini, that will raise questions among the staff. Then you will handle it, he said, turning to face her. The look in his eye silenced any further protest. From now on, she is to have no difficult tasks. She is to be treated with the utmost respect. She is under my protection. Is that clear? Perfectly, sir, Mrs. Gable said, her gaze dropping to the floor. She knew. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. This was not about a maid. This was about something else entirely. The days bled into a week. Marco's obsession grew. He adjusted his entire schedule to match hers. He would wake early to watch her on the monitors as she prepared the morning coffee. He would stay up late, watching the silent feed from the camera in the hallway outside her room, just to make sure she was safe. He was the ghost, haunting his own house, watching the woman he loved live a life he had inadvertently destroyed. He was in his study, reviewing financial reports Leo had prepared. It was late afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He was trying to focus on the numbers, on the cold, hard logic of his business, but his mind kept drifting. Drifting to the woman who was at that very moment cleaning the grand staircase just down the hall. He could almost smell her scent, a faint trace of lemon polish and the cheap soap she used. It was a scent of domesticity, of normalcy. A scent that had no place in his world. And yet, here it was. He was staring at a projection of quarterly profits when he saw it. A black sedan. Driving slowly past his front gates. Too slowly. He zoomed in the camera. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that he couldn't see the silhouette of the driver. He knew that silhouette. The arrogant tilt of the head. The expensive suit. Carmine Moretti. Marco's blood ran cold. It couldn't be a coincidence. Moretti had no business on this side of the city. His territory was downtown. For him to be here, personally driving by Marco's estate, meant only one thing. He knew. Somehow, after 5 years of silence, he knew Isabella was alive. And he knew she was here. Marco's internal conflict, the agonizing debate over whether to tell Isabella the truth or keep her in ignorance, vanished in an instant. It was replaced by a chilling clarity. The choice was no longer his to make. The past was not content to stay buried. It had come knocking. He watched as Moretti's car completed its slow pass and then sped up, disappearing down the road. It was a message. A threat. I know your secret. I know your weakness. Marco stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden. He saw her. Isabella. She was on her knees, carefully weeding a bed of lavender. Her back was to the road. She was completely oblivious to the predator that had just cruised by. She was a lamb in a lion's den. And he had brought her here. The guilt was a physical blow. He had thought he was protecting her, giving her a sanctuary. Instead, he had led her right back into the line of fire. He had painted a target on her back. The decision was made. Not in his head, but in his gut. A cold, primal certainty. He would no longer be a passive observer. He would no longer be a ghost in his own story. He was a king, and it was time to defend his kingdom. He turned from the window, his face a mask of stone. He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button that connected directly to Leo's security office in the main gatehouse. "Leo. My study. Now." There was no preamble, no greeting. Just the command. Leo was there in under 2 minutes, his face impassive but his eyes sharp with anticipation. He had seen the black sedan on his own monitors. He knew what this was about. "He knows," Marco said, without looking up from the blank surface of his desk. "It appears so, boss," Leo replied. A car fitting the description was spotted near her old apartment building twice last week. "We thought it was a coincidence." "There are no coincidences," Marco snarled, the words ripping from his throat. He slammed his fist on the desk, the solid wood groaning under the impact. For a moment, the mask of the ghost shattered, revealing the raging, terrified man beneath. He's been watching her. Waiting. He must have followed her here. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the cold control back into place. Emotion was a liability. He could not afford it now. "I want everything," Marco said, his voice dropping back to its lethal calm. "Everything you can find on Carmine Moretti's movements for the past month. Every phone call, every meeting, every credit card transaction. I want to know what he had for breakfast. I want to know who is on his payroll, who owes him favors, and who wants him dead." "We already have a substantial file on him," Leo said. "Then make it bigger. I want to know his weaknesses. And I want to know the exact timeline of the night of Isabella's accident. The original order. The men who carried it out. Who lived? Who died? Who talked? Boss, that was 5 years ago. The trail is ice cold." Marco finally looked up, and the sheer, glacial fury in his eyes made Leo take an involuntary step back. "Then you will make it hot," Marco commanded. "You will burn down whatever you have to burn down. You will call in every marker I have. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who gets hurt. This ends. Now." "Understood," Leo said, his voice a tight knot. He had never seen the boss like this. Not even during the height of the war with the old families. This wasn't business. This was biblical. "Get out," Marco said, turning his back on Leo and staring once more at the bank of monitors. On one of the screens, Isabella was now standing up, brushing dirt from her knees. She stretched, a simple, graceful movement that stole the air from his lungs. She was so beautiful. So innocent. So utterly unaware of the storm that was about to break around her. He had failed to protect her once. He would not fail again. He would become whatever he needed to be. A monster. A demon. A ghost. He would unleash hell itself to keep his one piece of heaven safe. The plan, when it came, was brutally simple. Marco's world operated on a currency of fear and respect. Carmine Moretti had shown disrespect of the highest order. He had violated the most sacred, unspoken rule: families are off limits. He had not just targeted Marco's wife, he had targeted her when she was no longer Marco's wife, when she was a civilian. An innocent. It was an act of profound dishonor, and it required a response of equal magnitude. Leo's team worked with terrifying efficiency. Within 48 hours, Marco's desk was covered not with ledgers, but with surveillance photos, financial records, and psychological profiles. They had maps of Carmine's daily routines, recordings of his phone calls, and a list of his vices. Greed was the primary one. His overleveraged, Leo reported, pointing to a series of bank statements. He bought into a new shipping route, but the Fed seized his first 2 containers. He's desperate for a cash infusion. Good, Marco said. A desperate man is a predictable man. The bait was a fictitious high-stakes poker game. The supposed host was a reclusive Japanese billionaire known for his love of gambling and his disdain for banks, a phantom created by Marco's contacts in Tokyo. The ante was $500,000, cash only. The location was a decommissioned warehouse in the neutral territory of the shipyards. An invitation was discreetly passed to one of Carmine's lieutenants, a man they knew to be a compulsive gambler. As predicted, the lure of easy cash was too much for Carmine to resist. He took the bait. He would attend personally, bringing only a small team. He thought he was walking into a card game. He was walking into his own eulogy. The night of the meeting was cold and damp. A thick fog rolled in from the sea, muffling sound and shrouding the shipyard in a ghostly white veil. It was perfect. Marco did not send his men. He went himself. This was not a task to be delegated. This was a sacrament. He took only Leo. They waited inside the cavernous warehouse, a single bare bulb hanging from the rafters casting long, distorted shadows. The air smelled of rust, salt, and cold steel. Marco stood in the center of the vast, empty space, his hands in the pockets of his long black coat. He was perfectly still. He was no longer Marco Bellini, the heartbroken man. He was the ghost, a spectre of vengeance come to collect a debt. Carmine Moretti and his 4 men arrived exactly at 10 o'clock. They entered the warehouse, their confident swagger faltering slightly as they took in the emptiness. There was no poker table, no billionaire, no piles of cash. Just one man standing in the shadows, and another standing by the door they had just entered. Bellini, Carmine said, a sneer twisting his lips, though his eyes darted nervously around the empty space. I should have known. This doesn't look like a poker game. It's not, Marco said, his voice calm, conversational. It was the calm that terrified people. It's a history lesson. Carmine's men fanned out, their hands reaching for their weapons. Leo, by the door, simply shook his head, a silent warning. From the high catwalks and hidden alcoves, the soft, metallic click of a dozen safeties being released echoed through the warehouse. Carmine's men froze. They were surrounded. Outnumbered. Outmaneuvered. You've gotten sloppy, Carmine, Marco continued, taking a slow step forward. Coming here with just 4 men. Driving by my house in your own car. You used to be smarter than that. What do you want, Bellini? Carmine spat, trying to maintain a brave face. Marco stopped about 10 feet from him. I want to talk about a woman. Dark hair, brown eyes. Her name was Isabella. A flicker of recognition, then arrogance, crossed Carmine's face. Ah, yes. Your pretty wife. The one who wasn't smart enough to stay away from you. I heard she had an accident. A real shame. There was no accident, Marco said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than any shout. You had your men run her off a mountain road. You tried to murder an unarmed woman to send me a message. Carmine laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. It worked, didn't it? Broke you for years. I should have made sure the job was finished. She had a lot of fire, that one. I bet she screamed. That was the final mistake. The world seemed to slow down. Marco saw not the sneering face of his rival, but Isabella's face, pale and confused in the doorway of his study. He felt the weight of her stolen years, the emptiness in her eyes. You broke the rules, Carmine, Marco said, his voice devoid of all emotion. Our world has rules. We don't touch family. We don't touch innocence. You did both. You didn't just try to kill her. You erased her. You took her memories. You took her life. He took another step forward. I'm here to give it back. What happened next was not a fight. It was an execution. Swift, silent, and absolute. Marco's men, shadows detaching from the greater darkness, moved with a brutal, synchronized grace. It was over in less than a minute. Marco himself did not move. He simply watched as Carmine Moretti was brought to his knees. Leo walked over and handed Marco a file. Marco opened it and dropped it at Carmine's feet. It was filled with photos. Photos of Isabella, laughing on a beach. Photos of their wedding day. Photos of a life that Carmine had tried to obliterate. "This is who you tried to destroy," Marco said softly. "Look at her. I want her face to be the last thing you see." Carmine looked down at the photos, then back up at Marco, his eyes finally wide with the true, abject terror of a man who knows he is about to die. "Please, Marco," he whimpered. "Mercy." "She was shown no mercy," Marco replied, his voice flat. "So you will be shown none." He turned and walked away, not looking back. He didn't need to. He knew the sounds that would follow. He walked out of the warehouse and into the thick, cleansing fog, leaving the ghosts of the past to be dealt with by the ghosts he commanded. Leo caught up with him at the car. "The Moretti problem is permanently closed," Leo said, his voice formal. Marco nodded, getting into the back seat. He leaned his head against the cool glass of the window, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. He had avenged her. He had delivered justice, his style of justice. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt finished. "Take me home, Leo," he said quietly. He needed to see her. He needed to see her safe. Marco returned to a silent house. The storm inside him had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm. The violence of the shipyard felt a lifetime away, a bad dream from another world. He walked through the grand halls of his mansion, the marble floors cool beneath his feet. He was no longer the ghost. He was just a man, returning home. He found her in the library. She wasn't cleaning. She was curled up in one of the large leather armchairs by the unlit fireplace, a thick woolen blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had fallen asleep reading. A book of poetry lay open on her lap. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her. The soft glow of a single reading lamp illuminated her face, smoothing out the lines of worry and fatigue. In sleep, she looked younger, more like the woman he remembered. Peaceful. Safe. This was his victory. Not the warehouse. Not the fear in Carmine Moretti's eyes. This quiet moment of peace. He walked over and gently took the book from her lap before it could fall. As he did, his fingers brushed against hers. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him, her gaze hazy with sleep, not fear. "Mr. Bellini," she murmured, her voice thick. "I'm sorry. I must have drifted off." "It's all right, Anna," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "It's late. You should be in bed." "I like it in here," she said, looking around the room, at the towering shelves of books. "It feels safe." The word hung in the air between them. He didn't know what to say. So he just stood there, the book of poetry in his hand. Months passed. A quiet rhythm settled over the house. With the threat of the Morettis gone, the oppressive tension that had surrounded Marco seemed to dissipate. He began to spend less time in his study and more time in the shared spaces of the house. He would find excuses to be where she was. He would take his morning coffee in the kitchen while she was there, listening to her hum softly as she worked. He would read in the library in the afternoons, just to be in the same room with her. They rarely spoke, but a strange, silent companionship grew between them. She began to change, too. Color returned to her cheeks. The haunted look in her eyes was slowly replaced by a gentle curiosity. She smiled more. She even started talking to some of the other staff, her natural warmth and kindness beginning to emerge from behind the wall of her amnesia. One afternoon, he found her in the gallery, dusting the frames of old family portraits. She stopped in front of a small, unassuming painting tucked away in a corner. It was a portrait of his mother as a young woman. "She's beautiful," Isabella said, without turning around. She knew he was there. "Her eyes are kind." "She was," Marco said, coming to stand beside her. "The kindest person I ever knew." "You miss her," she said. It wasn't a question. "Every day," he admitted. She was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the painting. "It must be nice," she said softly, "to have memories of the people you love." The simple, honest statement was like a knife to his heart. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. She had been tasked with organizing a disused storage room in the West Wing, a place filled with forgotten furniture and dust-covered boxes. Marco had forgotten what was in there. Late in the afternoon, she appeared at the door of his study. She wasn't holding a dust rag or a cleaning caddy. She was holding a large, leather-bound photo album. Her knuckles were white where she gripped it. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and confused. She walked to his desk and placed the album on the polished wood. She opened it to the first page. It was a picture of him, 20 years younger, his arm around a smiling young woman. A woman who looked startlingly like her. Page after page, it was the same. The two of them, laughing, kissing, living a life she couldn't remember. The last photo was from their wedding day. "Who is this woman?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marco's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment he had dreaded and longed for. He looked from the photograph to her face. "Her name," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was Isabella." She stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to process the impossible. She looks like me." "Yes," he said. "People in this house, they whisper about you," she said, a train of thought jumping, her mind reeling. "They say you're a dangerous man. Mrs. Gable is terrified of you. The guards, they watch me. But you've only ever been kind to me. You gave me a job, a safe place to live." She looked him directly in the eye, and the question she asked was one that tore through all the layers of his life, through the lies and the violence, to the very core of his being. "Are you a good man or a bad man, Mr. Bellini?" Time stood still. He could tell her everything. He could tell her about the Morettis, about the warehouse, about the life he led. He could try to explain the monster he had to be to protect the man he wanted to be. Or he could tell her a deeper truth. He reached across the desk and gently touched her hand. His gaze held hers, and in his eyes, she saw 5 years of pain, of longing, of unwavering, desperate love. "For you, Isabella," he said, using her real name, letting it fall into the space between them like a prayer. "I would be anything." Her breath hitched at the sound of the name. It was familiar. Like a half-forgotten song. A flicker of something, not a memory, but the echo of one, passed behind her eyes. Confusion, recognition, and a dawning, terrifying hope. He didn't push. He didn't explain further. The photo album lay open between them, a testament to a past she couldn't access and a future that was terrifyingly uncertain. He stood up and walked around the desk. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. "This is your home now," he said, his voice a solemn vow. "You are safe here. Always." He offered her a business card from his desk drawer. It was stark white, with only a single phone number embossed in black. His private line. "If you ever need anything. If you ever feel unsafe. You call this number. It will find me day or night." He was giving her a choice. He was giving her back her agency. She could run. She could stay. She could try to piece together the puzzle of her past, or she could start building a new future. He had cleared the board for her. The next move was hers. She looked down at the card in her hand, then back at his face. She didn't see a Mafia boss. She didn't see the ghost. She saw a man who looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like she was home. 1 year later. The garden was in full bloom. Sunlight, thick and golden, streamed through the leaves of the old oak tree. Laughter, clear and bright, drifted on the warm afternoon breeze. Isabella, she went by her real name now, was sitting on a blanket on the grass, teaching a giggling Mrs. Gable's granddaughter how to make a daisy chain. Her memory had not returned. The doctors said it likely never would. The trauma had been too severe, the damage too deep. The book of her past was still closed to her. But she had started a new one. She was no longer a maid. She was the lady of the house, not by title or by marriage, but by a quiet, unspoken understanding. She and Marco were building something new, something fragile and precious, on the ruins of their old life. It was a relationship born not of shared memories, but of shared moments, quiet breakfasts, evening walks through the garden, long conversations in the library. They were getting to know each other for the first time, all over again. Marco watched them from the patio, a small, unaccustomed smile on his face. He was a different man. The cold, hard edges had been softened. The ghost in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet light. On the small table beside him, next to a glass of iced tea, sat a strange object. It was the crystal tumbler he had dropped that first night, the night she had walked back into his life. He had had the pieces gathered and sent to a master artisan in Japan. It had been repaired using the ancient art of kintsugi, the cracks filled with veins of pure gold. It was no longer a broken glass. It was a work of art. A testament to the idea that something could be shattered and, in its mending, become more beautiful, more valuable than it was before. It was a memento of his own broken life, now being pieced back together with threads of hope and second chances. He looked at Isabella, her head thrown back in laughter, and he knew a profound truth. He had spent his life building an empire of power and fear, but it was all just a fortress to protect an empty room. She was the one who had finally made it a home. Some stories are not about finding the perfect life that was stolen from you. They are about having the courage to build a new one from the pieces left behind. True strength is not found in the absence of scars, but in the beauty of how they are healed. For Marco and Isabella, love was no longer just a memory of what was lost. It was a daily promise, a quiet commitment to find happiness not in the past, but in the precious, unfolding moments of the here and now.